Daniel and his horse became the nightmare every police officer feared, a man who could vanish in the shadows, steal without a trace, and escape capture with a speed no car could match. It all began in a quiet, sleepy town where life moved slowly and everyone knew everyone else. People left doors unlocked at night, and children played freely in the streets. Among the residents was Daniel, a man in his early 30s who had a quiet, almost ordinary life. He lived on the edge of town in a modest house with a large barn behind it, filled with horses that he cared for day and night. Daniel's love for horses was well known. People admired him for his skill with the animals, but few realized that behind his calm exterior, something darker was stirring. For months, small crimes had been creeping into the town like shadows. Shops reported items missing, fences were cut, and odd disappearances of valuable tools and equipment puzzled local authorities. No one could figure out who was behind it. People assumed it was teenagers or wanderers passing through, not someone like Daniel, whose presence in the community seemed harmless. He often smiled politely at neighbors, helped carry groceries for elderly residents, and maintained a reputation for kindness. Then, one evening, everything changed. A police officer on routine patrol noticed Daniel near the stables acting nervously. He seemed restless, moving quickly from one corner to another, his eyes darting as if someone was watching him. When the officer approached, Daniel's reaction was sudden and shocking. Without a word, he jumped onto the back of one of his horses and galloped away. The sight was both mesmerizing and terrifying, an adult man fleeing the police at full speed on horseback, weaving through narrow streets and open fields with astonishing agility. The chase became a spectacle. Neighbors ran to their windows, some holding their breath, others stepping outside to watch the unbelievable scene unfold. Daniel's horse moved like a shadow, swift and precise, following paths that few in the town even knew existed. The police tried to keep up with cars, shouting into radios, but the terrain and Daniel's knowledge of it gave him an edge. Every turn, every jump over fences, every sudden swerve seemed calculated. It was clear this was not a random act of fear or desperation. It was deliberate, practiced, and almost impossible to catch. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, Daniel had vanished into the darkness. Helicopters scanned the skies, officers combed the fields, and yet there was no trace. He had disappeared as if swallowed by the night itself. The town was left in shock, whispers spreading like wildfire. A man they thought they knew, a man who lived quietly among them, had revealed a side none could have imagined. The ordinary had turned into the extraordinary, and the story of Daniel, the man who fled police on horseback, had only just begun. The chase did not end the night Daniel disappeared. In fact, it had only just begun. The following days were filled with tension and fear as police tried to piece together what had happened. Daniel seemed to have vanished completely, leaving no tracks behind. Yet, everyone in town felt the lingering presence of his escape, as if the shadows themselves carried whispers of his movements. The police knew one thing: Daniel had an intimate understanding of the land, a knowledge that made him almost impossible to catch. He was seen only briefly, riding through the outskirts of town at dawn, his horse moving with incredible speed and precision. Fields and forests became his highways, narrow trails his escape routes. Officers who tried to follow him reported how quickly he disappeared, moving through terrain that was difficult even for the most experienced riders. His horse, a tall, muscular animal with a coat as dark as midnight, seemed to respond to commands without being touched, turning sharply, jumping over obstacles, and navigating paths no one else could manage. The townspeople were divided between fascination and fear. Some saw Daniel as a master of his craft, almost like a figure from an old story, a man and horse in perfect harmony. Others were terrified that he could appear anywhere, taking what he wanted and vanishing without warning. Reports came in from surrounding areas: missing tools, stolen supplies, and strange tracks leading into the woods. Slowly, a pattern began to emerge. Daniel was not acting randomly. Every move he made seemed calculated, every theft carefully planned. He had become more than just a local troublemaker. He was a ghost moving through the landscape, untouchable and unseen. Authorities began to set traps, but Daniel always stayed one step ahead. Cameras were installed, checkpoints were established, and officers waited patiently in the shadows, yet he slipped past them each time. His knowledge of the terrain, combined with the loyalty and intelligence of his horse, made him almost untouchable. It was as if the two shared a secret language, a bond that allowed them to move in perfect synchrony, evading capture at every turn. As days turned into weeks, the story of Daniel's escape spread beyond the town. Newspapers wrote about the man who could outrun modern police on horseback, and the tale grew in legend. But beneath the fascination lay a chilling truth. Daniel's skills were not just remarkable, they were dangerous. He had proven that he could take control of any situation, disappear without a trace, and leave everyone questioning how someone so ordinary could become so extraordinary. The town was left on edge, knowing that the chase was far from over. Weeks passed after Daniel's disappearance, and the town began to settle into an uneasy routine. People went about their lives, but a shadow of fear hung over every street and alley. The thefts had not stopped, and strange happenings kept the residents on edge. Horses vanished from nearby stables, farm equipment disappeared, and odd tracks appeared in muddy fields that led into forests and vanished as suddenly as they began. It became clear that Daniel was still out there, moving silently and carefully, leaving no evidence behind. Authorities redoubled their efforts. Officers examined the tracks, mapped possible escape routes, and interviewed neighbors, but every clue seemed to lead to nothing. Daniel had an uncanny ability to blend into the surroundings, hiding in plain sight, traveling only at times when he would not be noticed. Some residents reported seeing a dark figure on a horse in the early morning fog, gliding through fields as if floating above the ground. The whispers spread quickly. Daniel was no ordinary criminal. He was a ghost rider, untouchable and mysterious. One day, a patrol stumbled upon an old, hidden path in the forest, partially concealed by overgrown trees and brush. It seemed to be used recently, with broken branches and fresh hoof prints. Following the trail, they discovered a small, abandoned cabin tucked deep in the woods. Inside, the police found stolen goods, tools, small livestock, and personal belongings from several local farms. Maps of the town and surrounding areas were scattered across a table, with lines marking routes and escape paths. The discovery confirmed what the authorities had long suspected. Daniel was living deliberately off the land, moving strategically and planning each theft with care. What struck the police most was the precision of his actions. Nothing in the cabin suggested hasty movements or mistakes. Every item had a place, every trail had a purpose. It was a level of organization that far exceeded what they had expected from a man fleeing on horseback. He had not just evaded capture, he had turned the forest and fields into his personal maze, exploiting every corner, every hidden path, and every quiet hour of the night. The town's fear grew as it became clear that Daniel could strike anywhere at any time. Even those who had once admired him for his skill with horses now saw him as a dangerous figure, unpredictable and clever. The law was closing in, but Daniel seemed always one step ahead. The question on everyone's mind was not whether he would be caught, but when and what shocking move he would make next. The authorities knew they had to act carefully. Daniel was no longer just a man on the run. He had become a master of his environment, turning forests, fields, and abandoned areas into a network of hiding places. Every failed attempt to capture him made the police more cautious and more determined. They studied his patterns, his timing, and even the behavior of his horse, which seemed to have an almost supernatural sense of danger. The town waited nervously, knowing that the next encounter could happen anywhere at any moment. Cameras were placed along likely routes, checkpoints were established at every major road, and undercover officers patrolled the outskirts, blending in with ordinary residents. Bait was carefully set in stables and farms that had previously been targeted. Days turned into nights filled with silence and tension, as if the entire town held its breath, waiting for Daniel to appear. And then, finally, he did. At dawn one morning, a figure appeared on a distant trail, moving with precision and speed. The horse's hooves struck the ground rhythmically, and the rider carried bundles that clearly did not belong to him. Officers quietly moved to surround him, but Daniel, anticipating the trap, suddenly veered off the trail and headed toward a river. The horse leapt across the shallow banks, landing gracefully on the other side and disappearing into the dense brush. What amazed the police was not just his speed, but the seamless coordination between man and horse. It was as if they were one being, responding to invisible cues and signals, moving with perfect understanding. Authorities soon realized that this was no ordinary chase. Daniel and his horse shared a connection that went beyond training or familiarity. The animal seemed to anticipate his every move, reacting instantly to the slightest gesture or shift in weight. It was a partnership that made Daniel almost untouchable, allowing him to escape situations that would have trapped anyone else. The town, meanwhile, was in awe and fear. Stories of the mysterious rider spread, each retelling more exaggerated than the last. People whispered about his uncanny abilities, about a man who could vanish in the blink of an eye, leaving only hoofprints and a trail of stolen goods behind. The police, frustrated but determined, continued their surveillance, knowing that capturing Daniel would require patience, strategy, and perhaps a little luck. One thing was certain: the legend of the man who fled police on horseback was growing, and the suspense was far from over. Months passed, and the town had begun to accept the strange reality of Daniel's escape. People remained cautious, leaving gates closed and keeping an eye on the shadows, but life continued. Then, unexpectedly, the mystery reached its dramatic end. Authorities received a tip from a hiker who had spotted a faint trail leading deep into an abandoned area far from town. Following the path carefully, police discovered a dilapidated barn hidden among overgrown trees and thick underbrush. Inside, they found Daniel, weak and tired, but alive. The horse, loyal as ever, was standing silently beside him, as if guarding its companion from the world outside. It soon became clear how Daniel had survived for so long. He had been living off the land, moving only at night, and carefully avoiding populated areas. He had relied on his horse not just for speed, but for companionship, guidance, and protection. The bond between man and animal had allowed him to navigate the wilderness with unmatched skill, leaving no trace for authorities to follow. Everything about his life in hiding was precise, calculated, and almost unbelievable. Once arrested, Daniel's story began to unravel. Investigators learned about the planning behind each theft, each escape, and each narrow disappearance. He had studied the town, memorized the roads, trails, and hidden paths, and used the horse to execute every move flawlessly. The sheer intelligence and discipline of his actions left the police both amazed and unsettled. What had started as a quiet life on the edge of town had turned into a months-long game of cat and mouse, with Daniel always seeming one step ahead. The townspeople who had once admired his skill with horses now saw him in a very different light. The man who had appeared so ordinary had revealed an extraordinary cunning, a dangerous cleverness, and a level of control few could match. The story spread far beyond the town, captivating news outlets and social media, turning Daniel into a figure both legendary and feared. Despite being in custody, the tale of Daniel and his horse left a lasting impression. People continued to whisper about the man who could outsmart the modern police with just a horse and a deep knowledge of the land. His capture felt almost surreal, like the ending of a story that had been too wild to believe. The town would never forget the daring escapes, the mysterious rides through forests and fields, and the lesson that sometimes reality can be stranger and far more thrilling than fiction.